I'd like to show you how I work a waste yarn opening in a fabric that is not stockinette. So here's what it looks like in stockinette. Elizabeth Zimmerman called this a thumb trick, and here's an example. So the mitten was worked from cuff to tip. I had to plan where I wanted the waste yarn opening, and when I got to that round, I worked about a dozen stitches with a piece of contrasting waste yarn. Then I slid those stitches back from the right needle to the left needle, and then worked across them in pattern as if nothing had happened and just kept going. So there was a point when the mitten was almost done where it looked like a completed mitten, except instead of having a thumb, it had a little dash of contrasting color where the thumb should be. And all I had to do was come back and pick that out, and that gave me live stitches on each side of the slit. Those live stitches went onto double pointed needles. I could join in my project yarn and work in the round, and you can see I could even do it in pattern. So it's a very handy trick to know. You can, by the way, do this in sock yarn as well. If you have a self-patterning sock yarn, you can do the waste yarn across about half the circumference of the sock and then come back, open it up, and put in an afterthought heel. So that's what a waste yarn opening is. But I've done some designs where I'm using this technique to insert a sleeve, and I'm doing it on 1x1 ribbing rather than stockinette, and I wanted to show you how I do that instead. And probably the obvious difference you see is that I'm using 3 pieces of waste yarn, not 1. So on this swatch I have 1x1 ribbing. When I decided I was ready for the slit, I worked across in yellow, and this is in pattern. This is 1x1 ribbing with the yellow, and then coming back this way, 1x1 ribbing with the red, and then 1x1 ribbing with the blue. At that point, I slid the blue stitches back from the right needle to the left needle, picked up my white yarn, which is just sitting there. You don't have to cut your project yarn. That's part of the brilliance of this technique. And then I just continued in 1x1 ribbing. So the whole swatch is 1x1 ribbing. So when I'm ready to open up the slit here, here's what I do. I get some needles I'm going to use as parking needles. In other words, I'm basically using them as stitch holders. The needles could be the same size as my project needle, or they could be a size smaller. And I will just park those yellow stitches on this needle. So this will prevent those stitches from escaping and going places they shouldn't. Once I have that, I rotate 180 degrees. And now I do the same thing with the blue stitches. And these are the stitches Lucy Neatby would call Australian cousins. They tend to look a little strange normally, and when you work them in pattern, they look really strange. But this is part of the advantage of having done the extra waste yarn, is I can look at this and go, well, like I need a loop and that looks like a loop. So I guess that's where the needle tip will go. So I can come across here and I can put the blue stitches on a parking needle. Okay, now I can actually open this up. So all I have to do is pull out the red yarn, which should pull right out, and the slit opens up. And because my stitches are on parking needles, they don't go anywhere. They just stay there and wait for me. Now what I can do is come along with the yellow ones and I can just tink these out the way I would correct a mistake. So I can just come along and put these up on a needle. At least I think I can do that. And the advantage of having the extra waste yarn is, let's say I had made a mistake and I had missed one of these stitches. It's not a big deal because with the extra waste yarn, that hopefully will prevent things from popping out and getting away, and I would still be able to pick it up and correct it without having a stitch, say, run away and create a big mess. So almost at the end here. And last two. 1 and 2. Okay, and I should be able to just pull the yellow out. Yep, the yellow just pops out. Okay, so that's one side is parked and ready to go. Now I will rotate. The Australian cousins are a little bit different. The blue yarn is not going to just pop out the way the yellow and the red did. This, I'm going to have to either pick it out one stitch at a time, or I'm going to have to snip it out. But once again, I can use this as a way to figure out where to get stitches. So I'm going to get one in the corner, and then I'm going to come along here, and you'll notice these stitches are facing every other direction. So half of them are facing east and half are facing west. So this is the sort of thing when I go to work these, I will have to pay attention to that. But I'm noticing that now, so I can be ready for it later. And then I think the last thing I will do is see if I can sort of pick up in this corner here as well. Okay. So at this point I would still need to pull the blue out. Then I can come back and join my new yarn, my project yarn. I'm already in 1x1 ribbing. I'm ready to work in the round. If you need to, you can pick up extra stitches kind of in the corner if you're afraid you're going to get a gap. And then on round 2, decrease those stitches away to kind of tighten it up. Yes, when you work across the Australian cousins, you are going to be off by half a stitch. There's not anything you can do about that. It's not going to be perfect, but it's not going to be as bad as you think. So just trust that it will be clean but not perfect, and you just have to learn to live with it. But there you go. You're just off in the round and everything's good. So there you are. If you're in Stockinette, I think one piece of waste yarn works fine. If you are in a patterned fabric, I know it takes more time and effort to use 3 pieces of waste yarn, but I think it's worth it to get the whole thing to work out right on the first try. Happy knitting!